Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of DoubleDM podcast, where we are today talking about creating lairs for your villains and legendary monsters that they deserve. Because let's be real, sometimes lairs are just lackluster. So let's make better ones. And that is what we're going to talk about today. But first, as every week, we are here to discuss what happened in this week for Niels and me, TTRPG-wise and also general life-wise. Because this is a talk show, we want you to get comfortable. We want you to sit down, grab a drink, and enjoy the conversations had. Not just get information and advice. That's boring. So let me ask the first question. Niels, how are you doing today?
I am doing amazingly today.
Amazingly.
Finally.
I think in 135 episodes of DoubleDM, I have never heard Niels say amazingly today.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him how his day was. So why is that?
Well, there are a couple of layers to this. First of all, I just got paid, so I have money again. That's amazing, right? And second of all is last weekend I started redecorating my flat a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And my balcony and my bedroom are done now. And next week, I am looking to redecorate a bit of my living room and office space kind of thingamajig.
Mm-hmm.
So I can finally have more friends over and sit around at a table and not just at a sofa, because that was a little cramped here in this room. So I will get a new table for people to sit at. And I have some paintings / pictures / posters that I want to hang up and a bit of decoration and just,
fill the
right?
room up a bit. Yeah, and I
Exactly.
get what you mean.
After 2 years or 3 years of living here, I thought, well, it's time to decorate a bit, right? Better late than never.
I get what you mean, though, especially when money's tight. Decorating the room, decorating the living space isn't necessarily on the to-do list or on the priority list.
Exactly.
Same for me. I still have the idea to make my living room a very cozy area that is great for TTRPGs, but also to just hang out with friends. But it's supposed to have the vibe of you're entering a place where magic happens. Okay, that sounds entirely wrong.
Yeah, but I get what you mean.
But maybe, I'm open to all forms of magic here. Okay, so you've been decorating your rooms or your flat a bit, or changing it up a bit. So did you have time for TTRPGs between all that?
Yes, I did. On Tuesday, I had my usual Tuesday session.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically just talking. I think we had only 2 dice rolls in 4 hours, but it was more of a characters interacting with each other and asking questions about a quest that they were on while my character was busy crafting shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just basic talks, basic stuff. No, but it was a lot of fun. And the things that my character built turned out pretty good.
What did you build?
I built a magical plate armor out of sea dragon scales for our paladin, and I built a magical collapsing compound bow for our arcane archer fighter that now kind of can shoot a fireball arrow, but in a smaller radius, but with force damage kind of thing.
So it had nothing to do with fireball, it's just AoE force damage.
Yeah, but yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, okay, no. A quick mini DoubleDM episode here. Quick question to you, Niels. You just said, right, it was a great session, blah. It was basically just talking. We only had 2 dice rolls, right? Why do you think that the amount of dice rolls, especially if it's low, is something that not just you, but everyone, I do it too, is something that we brag about in the TTRPG space, especially D&D, right? Because there are games that only call for 2 dice rolls in 4 hours, usually. But D&D obviously calls for a lot more. So why do we take it as an achievement to have that little dice rolls at the game?
Because I think, at least in my group, it feels like we are all so in sync or in doing or proficient in doing what we want to do, or in playing our characters the way that we all want them to, without just talking only in third person of my character does this, my character does that, but being more descriptive, just having a talk with your fellow characters. I think this is a thing that isn't as prominent in D&D. Just having heart-to-heart talks with your fellow characters, or at least not in the rules. There are no rules for that, but it furthers character development, at least in my opinion, in a big way.
I know the reasons what it does and how it works, but why do we take it as a point to brag? Why is this something that we want to be celebrated for?
I don't know.
Right, that's the question. Because I know why when you have a session that doesn't roll that much dice, it's often more role play focused in a game where role play has no roles attached. And that's okay, at least to some degree. You could argue that that's not, but that's a real DDM episode maybe. But because I always see when there's discourse online on Twitter or Reddit and people are talking about something, there's always, if it is applicable, some kind of person that goes, yeah, my tables usually don't roll that many dice. And it's supposed to be an accomplishment. It's an achievement. It's a positive thing. And yeah, it is. But why do you want it to be a positive thing? Like, isn't it just a neutral thing?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is.
Yeah, but why do we say it then?
Yeah, just because it's not the norm, just because it's not the usual thing.
But doesn't that mean that you think you're better than other people for rolling less dice?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. Just that it's different. It's not better or worse or anything. It's just different.
But you do have a need to tell everyone that you rolled less dice. Because let's be real, I've never heard someone say, in my sessions, you roll more dice than the average table. I've never heard someone say that. So there must be a reason why we think that it's a thing to present that we roll less dice at our tables at given points. Right? This is obviously not a critique at you, how you present it, or your table. I hope you know that, right? But it's just a question that I asked myself a number of times every time I see someone talk about, right? Oh, I just had a D&D session for 5 hours and we only rolled it and rolled not a single dice. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool, but why is that so noteworthy? Because I had no one's go, yeah, we just had a 5-hour D&D session, a big BBEG comment, and we rolled so many dice. I've never had someone go that direction. And I'm just asking myself, why?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know.
I don't necessarily need an answer, right? But it's something that I realized that I don't care how many dice are rolled in a session. It just doesn't matter. The amount of dice rolls happened in the session is not an indicator at all for how good the session was for me. So I think, like, personally, right, it's never when I hear someone say, boy, we only rolled 2 dice, it's never a moment where I go like, okay, that's cool or that's bad. I just go, okay, cool. I just throw that information away because it isn't necessary to me. You just peaked basically with your sentence that I've been thinking about for a long time, but didn't really think that that's an episode worth of DDM, because I don't know the psychological meaning behind why we think that this is an accomplishment or not.
Yeah,
because I've said the same thing, right? Boy, cool, the session was so amazing and we rolled so little dice, and then after I was like, wait,
why does it matter?
The circumstances of your session are the things calling for your dice rolls. So the dice rolls is just a numeric indicator for circumstances at your table, but we all know that the numerous different circumstances can lead to the same outcome. So we only rolled 2 dice rolls at my table could mean, first of all, we only role played, but it also could mean, right, our session only, but could also mean, right, we out of those 4 hours, 3 hours was spent outside character just doing dumb shit at the table. The indicator would be the same. There were only 2 dice rolls. The less dice rolls happen at your table, it often is an indicator for there's more role play, there's more character development, where there are no dice rolls in D&D.
Exactly. That's just where I'm coming from. From my experience, at least in most games that I've played in, the less dice rolls we had, the more in-character talks with other characters we had. Yeah. And maybe that's the reason why I'm quote-unquote bragging about this.
I think that's actually exactly where it is, right? Because the talk is about D&D, and D&D doesn't have dice rolls for roleplay. So when you say we rolled a little dice, it is supposed to say we roleplayed a lot. And that is supposed to be an achievement, because for a big chunk of people, and I would say myself included to at least some extent, TTRPGs are about storytelling.
Hell yeah.
They don't have to be. They are for a lot of people because that's what they want from them, and that's okay. And then the indicator of we rolled very little dice in a game that does not call dice for storytelling and role-playing is obviously an indicator for we role-played a lot. And that's what I wanted from the game, so it's a positive thing. But therefore, it is a positive thing, and it's a thing to brag that you only had 2 dice rolls, even though I think it would be better when you brag, when you say, in our D&D session, we had amazing roleplay and character development instead of we had only 2 dice rolls, right? It would make more sense that way. But obviously, naming the, only 2 sounds cooler than the long explanation of we had character development and roleplay.
And to be fair, I really like hearing numbers in certain degrees. So saying we only had 2 dice rolls is way more interesting, at least to me or to my ears, than hearing we had a lot of roleplay. Because what is a lot? Cool. Give me some quantity of shit. That's maybe the scientific thing that
D&D doesn't have a measure for roleplay.
Yeah.
And you need to measure it some way to make it more palpable for other people that are only hearing about your game and have not experienced it. I had a session on Tuesday, for example, where my players basically committed crimes. Everyone understands that, but I cannot tell you about the crimes, first of all, because it's an actual play recording. Second of all, because the specific circumstances called for it. And I think that's actually, right, it's kind of fun to think about. But breaking that discussion off, you had an amazing session. That's all that counts.
Exactly.
It was about roleplay. It was about crafting some items. So let me ask the question, because I've rudely broken off your story. Where does it lead now? What is the next big thing for your group?
The next big thing is doing a job for our paladin who nearly broke her oath, kind of restoring that pact. Yeah, just mending some potential breaking points in that oath. So that's where we are headed next. And after that, we are going to go towards the hometown of my character, because near that there is or we found a map that near there is a mountain, which I don't remember being there. Some sort of weird ancient history shit is going on there. Yeah, I'm intrigued, and my character is also fucking intrigued because archaeologists dig ancient stories, I guess.
They dig indeed. Okay, nice. Interesting.
Yeah. But how was your week? Overall, TTRPG-wise, tell me about it.
My week's been great. It was very chill. I had stuff to do, so I also wasn't bored. I've already have done a lot of editing for DoubleDM, and now the latter part of the week is basically all TTRPGs. Today, tomorrow, Sunday. Perfect. Saturday is a little rest day, where I'm actually going out to a restaurant to celebrate my grandmother's birthday, so it is promising to be a great end of the week already.
Perfect.
So, yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I have nothing else to share.
Me neither.
Yeah, so let's jump into our episode on layers, and especially creating actually good layers or layers. Hey listener, how are you enjoying the show so far? Tell us about it in whatever way you see fit. Go to our social media pages and add us or DM us about your favorite episode of the show. We would love to hear from you on what impact our show might have had on your home games. Or you could review us on your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice message with a 5-star review. And if you want to go above and beyond, bring a friend into the fold. Tell them about our show and refer us to them so they can get a piece of the pie as well. Thank you for listening to DoubleDM and joining us on this incredible journey.
So, Emil, recently I had this one-shot with this big red dragon that I ran for my players. And then I asked myself,
I'm so sorry. Yeah. Because normally, right, you classify dragons by age. A young adult, great worm, blah, blah, blah. I think that we should classify them by chunkiness. Big. This dragon was big red dragon. No, sorry. But yeah, okay. Yeah, it was an ancient great worm, whatever. It was big dragon.
A big old chonker, yeah. Obviously, ancient great worm has its own lair. Obviously, right? It
has to, yeah.
It's just a given. And the thing is, with that, I ask myself, what makes some room or some space a lair? And what makes a great lair stand out? And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Just right out of the gate, what is a lair, or what makes a space a lair rather than just an open space?
So I think that this question is already kind of a big one. But to break it down personally for me, it is a space where this creature that you are fighting, chasing, or have come to clash with feels at home. Not necessarily feels at home, but is at an advantage. This is where it is fighting best. You've ventured into the den of the lion, you ventured into the mouth of the dragon, whatever, right? You ventured into a place where this creature has the unmistakable advantage over you when looked at the combat or when looked at generally everything. And that can be something that, for example, right, for at least in D&D terms, right, some ancient great beings like dragons, beholders, I think, too, legendary creatures have layers that they can use. But at the same time, who's to say that a little owl bear who has challenge rating 4, I think, hasn't also some kind of layer where they're feeling stronger, where they have an advantage on you. It doesn't necessarily have to be, right, they have layer actions, but generally just talking about a layer is, for me, this is a place where whatever calls this place home has an advantage over everyone else that doesn't. And that can be mechanical or maybe also necessarily not mechanical, whatever that may be. But it's just a place for this creature to be at an advantage and also to feel kind of safe because of those advantages.
Yeah, I think a big part for me when talking about layers is that it needs not necessarily only a sense of familiarity, but knowing everything that there is to know about this place. When you're talking about a layer of a great worm, this great worm knows every nook and cranny, everything there is to know about this place, knows every hiding spot that they could possibly be in, everything. And just that is not only a sense of familiarity, but just pure knowledge of everything that is this place or once was.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the fun things, right? They know everything about this place. And I mean, when most people think of lairs, they think of, I don't know, a dragon's lair, a big cave in a mountain that this dragon has decorated in whatever way to see fit to fit their hoard. But at the end of the day, a lair is just a place. It can also be a building. And I mean, when you have dungeons in your world, for example, they have been built by someone for some purpose. That someone that has built these dungeons to serve a certain purpose would call these dungeons their lair, maybe. An ancient lich that has built a dungeon to protect their wisdom on death, undeath, and life. They've built that place to fit them. They've built that place to their advantage. It's not just a cave that they know. It's a place that they've made theirs. It's a place that they've made their lair. And I think that's where the fun part lies with lairs, is the creature you are chasing, fighting, wanting to talk to, interact with. This place you're in currently has been made to be perfect for them by them.
Yeah, a big part is modification.
Yeah, they made it themselves to be perfect. That doesn't say that it's actually a perfect lair, because this creature could have flaws, right? If a dragon is very vain and arrogant, their lair might reflect that. But that also could be a potential weakness that players can exploit. So, and that's where I think the first part of creating layers comes from, is look at the creature you're taking. You have to at every step anyway, but find out what this creature wants from their lair.
Yeah.
Is it supposed to protect them or something? Is it supposed to present them or something, right? A dragon doesn't necessarily need a lair to defend themselves against invaders if the dragon always believes that he's going to fight off any invader anyway. But then he would still need a lair to present his massive amounts of gold that he ravaged from the villages below of the mountain pass or something.
Yeah. And I think everything that there is in a lair should in some way reflect something that is this creature creature that lives there, being it a personality trait or a physical thing that this creature can do or can't do. But the lair should reflect that and play into these or into their own strength most of the time.
It definitely has to work with the creature. And not just the stat block and the mechanics of that creature, but also how you play that creature. For example, something I did a long time ago at this point, my players had to fight a Rothathor, the white old death or the old white death in the Sea of Moving Ice in one of his many layers. And now that's the thing, many layers, right? He had more than just one. But this one layer, right, he was sleeping in it for currently. And he is a hunter. He enjoys the thrill of hunting his enemies, of tasting their blood before they fall before him. He's not an efficient killer. He wants to have fun. His lair actions, for example, reflected that. They weren't, I'm gonna kill you. They were obscuring vision, creating obstacles, something that would make the chase more fun. And he wanted the player characters to flee. He wanted them to run away. And when he created a fog cloud that obscured vision and froze the air around the player characters, right? He wanted them to get into disadvantageous positions. He didn't want necessarily to kill them with the ice fog. No, he wanted them to suffer. He wanted them to move. He wanted them to flee. Because that would satisfy his hunter's thrill, his hunter's lust. And that's what he wanted. He didn't want to just kill. At first, at least. When he then realized the players were actually formidable foes for him, he got to fighting way more quickly. He became much more dangerous because he didn't hold back anymore. Or at least because he stopped or he suppressed his hunger for a thrillful hunt and said, no, I just need to kill you. I can hunt later again. Or at least I kill enough of you so the rest runs away.
And the way that this lair is built or was built by a Rothathor reflected that or that desire to do so with the abilities or things that Rothathor could do in that or within that space.
Kinda. I'm gonna say it the way it is. That layer was one of many, right? That's what I said before. It's one of many. And he had many layers, and Rothathor, as a hunter, didn't really design his layers to be the place where he fights. They are designed to be places where he rests and eats. So this layer wasn't necessarily designed to reflect his hunter personality, because I said, well, no, he wouldn't even create a layer that would reflect that hunter in him, because he wouldn't have a layer for that, because he has many layers. And he, for example, he's one of the few dragons that actually divide their horde up into these many different layers. Most of these layers actions are there to basically protect the layer itself.
Okay, now I understand.
Right? It's still a purpose designed for that layer. That layer was supposed to be a place where he stores his valuables and rests before he flies off again. There were, for example, in the design of that layer, a lot of different ways to get out of this layer for him. There was an underwater tunnel, there was a flying hole in the ceiling, and a lot of different pathways through the caves for him. It gives him a lot of opportunities, because this layer isn't supposed to be the indomitable fortress of a dragon where he can sit atop his throne of gold, because this dragon is basically, he's a free spirit. He doesn't want to be pinned down in a place for too long. He needs a lot of ways to get out of this room, because whatever way he feels like to do that day, he needs it. That's kind of how the layer was designed. And I think that's important when you design your monster layers, which you're gonna do at some certain points, because your players are gonna venture into the layers of monsters and villains, because that's what they do in heroic epic fantasy or sci-fi or heroic epic TTRPGs. That's just how it is. Need to put the layer in second place. It should be a grand thing, but you need the villain first. You cannot create a good layer without a villain to house it in.
Exactly. And I think they not necessarily work in tandem, but without the villain, you can't have the great layer. But when they are fighting the villain in this great layer, the layer should reflect or enhance the abilities of that creature or the person that you are fighting in that. Not necessarily in a purely mechanical way, but in a role-playing sense as well. For example, if you're searching for a shapeshifter that's abducted a lot of people, blah, 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 and it turns out, this was all part of this big theater thing, or the person that did this was is hiding in the theater. And now the theater is basically their lair, not necessarily because there's a lot of danger for the characters involved, mechanically speaking, but because of the skills that this person has created, can better maneuver this theater place and knows exactly where to go and what to do to achieve the thing that they want to achieve. And it has no necessarily mechanical influence on damage numbers or blah, all of that. But just because of the knowledge of this place and how everything there works, they gain the upper hand. And not because they conjure an ice storm or suddenly there's a big crowd of people, but because they know where the fucking banisters are, what lever to pull, and where to go, and where are some side entrances or workarounds to just outmaneuver them.
I really want to run such a lair. I think a lot of people have that dream to run the theater lair, some kind of theatrical villain that has grand speeches, is kind of a little bit unhinged.
Yeah, this is amazing.
And basically just fools and shits on the players while basically evading attacks and just hiding among the rough. Yes. But
heavenly.
it's also very hard to do.
It is
very hard to do because you need to create a layer that works. Because if your players are wanting to interact with it, it should work. I think that's one important thing that I'm gonna talk about in a bit. But first, right, I wanted to say something. You create your layer matching to that villain. So we said, right, you create your layers fitting towards your villains so that the villain has an advantage when using them, and just right, it feels synergetical. I don't know if that's a word, but at the same time, that also means that when you then present the layer, which often happens before you present the villain, the layer needs to present the villain for you. A villain that is arrogant and vain, a red dragon that is arrogant and vain, will maybe have statues of themselves, warning signs of slain corpses of the old adventurers that came before you, inscriptions on the walls that reflect the grand adventures of this person, or in the theater example, right? Maybe this villain that you have is somehow a deranged clown, right? Because that's a very fun trope for a lot of people with the Joker and Buggy the Clown from One Piece. Well, then you need to have, the deranged graffiti or makeup everywhere on statues in the halls before the players get to the ballroom or something. The layer needs to introduce your villain for you, or you need to introduce your villain with the layer. Obviously, if your players already know the villain, you don't need to introduce them, but the layer needs to represent them.
And I think the layer needs to introduce them to or in a new light. They know the villain.
Yeah.
If you're encountering the villain in the layer, it not necessarily needs to reintroduce the villain, but introduce new sides or new aspects to the villain, because that's what the layer basically does. It gives them advantages that you haven't seen before. And just foreshadowing those with the descriptions of the layer itself or how the layer feels or works just makes it so much more fun when you then get to really use or interact with the villain itself. It's just a complete new level of amazing if you do that.
That's definitely what you're supposed to do, because the villain is a reflection of this person, right? The same goes for you. When you have your own house or home or flat or whatever, right?
Exactly.
It is a reflection of who you are as a person. You decorate it the way you want it to be decorated. If it's messy, you're a messy person. And hey, I'm not here to criticize you if you have a dirty apartment. My apartment is definitely in need of more cleaning right now. And I'm probably gonna vacuum after this recording. However, when someone now enters my lair to slay me, they would notice that this place is kind of messy. This person must be this and this. And whatever conclusion your players might draw from this, it can be right or wrong. You just need to show them, this dragon doesn't really have that much of an organization structure to their horde, for example. It's all just one big pile.
Yeah.
Because that's always how it's represented. But maybe there's a dragon that is actually very neatly organizing gold, platinum, silver, copper coins, and then diamonds, magic items, and I don't know, right? Famous paintings. And That then is something that show, don't tell, right? Show your players this, because they might not necessarily see that side of that villain in their interactions beforehand. Because one fun thing about your villains, even if they're not the 20 charisma bard, they do care about their appearances. And it's just a fact for your villain. The villain represents themselves how they want to be represented to people around them. And this goes for basically everything. Sure, there might be a few exceptions, but your villain is presenting themselves how they want to be presented when they are wanted to be perceived, when they stand on the grand stage and have their big speech about how the kingdom failed them and that people should return to the better ways of nature or whatever. The druid villain is gonna be presenting themselves in the best light that they can. However, when the players enter his grove or something, they might see a different new side, because in this layer, this druid didn't think about having to present themselves in their best light at all times.
Exactly. And with that, you can play with showing your players new sides of everything that there is, and showing new character traits to the villain that didn't occur in their usual, or in quotation marks, normal confrontations or get-togethers. I don't know what, it depends on what type of villain you are running, obviously, but if you have a more political intrigue, your players might encounter the villain more often, just because of the nature. I don't know. And how they present themselves outside of the lair to the players is completely different. And then when they enter their base of operation, they see notes and notebooks and paintings and basically this meme with the red string all over the place. And it just introduces a new light, or it shines a new light on the character that you're using, to maybe even force but encourage a change of heart for the players at some point, maybe, depending on what you want to do and what your villain is. Because if suddenly you can understand the motives behind that, or because you showed them the motives, it might change their perception of the person or the thing that the players are currently working actively against. And then it's all just hypothetical and a thing that could happen depending on what type of villain you want run and how you want to run it. But it's a possibility for you to do something along those lines.
Yeah.
If you show them that this villain did all of this for this specific reason, and your players might say, yeah, I can resonate with that, but the way is wrong. But we might be able to help each other out. It just opens up new options for your players to interact. And that's what TTRPGs are about, interacting with things. Reacting and acting based on the information that you have, and interacting with objects, creatures, persons, and all of the world around you. And if you introduce new things to the world to interact with, it just gets that much more deeper and more engaging, because you have more things to engage with.
You add another layer to the layer.
Exactly.
But what you just said is very important, because that's what I wanted to talk about before, but had to put down for a minute or two in this recording, is when you have your layer, especially when you have, for example, layer actions, and you have the layer be a certain way that has, for example, traps or whatever mechanisms behind it, be that magical, mundane, or just mechanical in the game sense. Give players a way to interact with that layer as well. For example, the theater layer, which is a very cool layer that has a lot of levers and ropes and rafters and hidden passages and whatnot all. At first, your villain might understand these mechanisms perfectly at all times. But when your characters, when a wizard or an high intelligence character says, can I spend an action to make an investigation check to understand the mechanisms of these ropes strung across stage? Give them the opportunity to. Give your players the chance to look at the layer, understand it, maybe not necessarily use it to the effectiveness of the villain that uses this layer. Because let's be real, it is supposed to be a location where your players are at a disadvantage because of that layer. And I think that's a fact that you can accept. You don't need to necessarily completely level the playing field. But when one of your players asks, is there a way for me to use this certain thing, how the villain has used it against the villain? And now this is a split second call. It depends on the layer you're currently designing. But yes, if you have, I don't know, 4 levers on a wall, and the villain knows what each one of these 4 does, and pulls the one that pulls them up to the rafters so they are out of range for spells and can basically continue insulting the players as they get away. When the barbarian runs up to the ropes and just pulls one of the levers and falls through the floor, that's funny. But when after that the artificer pulls another lever and the same thing happens, that's not fun. The artificer player probably went, okay, you pulled that lever, so I'm not gonna not pull that one, pull this one and hope for a different effect. Or maybe I even did an investigation check beforehand and know the second lever is gonna give me something that is maybe gonna get me up there, or even cut off the escape route of this villain. So I'm gonna pull that lever. And then the lair is not designed for just the villain. It is designed to be still a place for interaction to happen. And when combat happens, as with D&D at least is mostly the case, give your players the same way the villain uses the lair to be used. For example, in the Erothafall lair, one of the lair actions, which he used the least because it was the least fun for me, was the option to let ice picks rain down from the ceiling and hit 3 different creatures. Now, that meant that the ceiling was full of ice picks. No big deal there, right? When then one of my players goes, can I, with my Eldritch Blast, shoot one of these ice picks above the dragon to hit him? I went, sure, try it. Make this attack roll. The AC isn't high, but you need to at least make this amount of damage with your blast. Let that thing fall. And then I'm going to make an attack roll against the dragon, how the lair action would do it. +9 to hit this amount of damage, blah, blah, blah. The players obviously took a little bit more of cold damage because these ice picks dealt cold and piercing damage. And the dragon is immune to cold damage, but he still took the piercing damage because the warlock player went, the ice picks deal more damage than my Eldritch Blasts do on average. So why don't I just try to hit the ice picks? And I was like, that's a cool idea. And it sounds cinematic as fuck to do that.
So hell yeah.
So hell yeah, let's do it. That only works if I as a GM allow things to happen for my players because they absorb what is the layer around them and try to make it to their advantage. And that's what your layer is about. It is supposed to be an advantage for the villain, but it is still basically an environment that can be turned around.
Yeah, and regarding that, that is something that you have to keep in mind, that when this happens, how does the villain react to those things? That's also really a really interesting question. If it's just, the ancient red great worm has the power to let lava erupt from the earth. That's something the players might not be able to do necessarily, but it depends on how and blah, 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 all of the stuff.
It's a thing that depends, right? If one of your, for example, for me, it's always the thing, I'm not going to say to my players, you also can do this. And this might be a problem and might be a problem in the game design or something, or of the design of my sessions. But generally, if my players ask me, is there a way for me to trigger that molten lava myself? And I go, you're a fire genasi, draconic bloodline red dragon. You're basically all fire. Sure, make an Arcana check.
Yeah, and then just imagine the face of the dragon that they are fighting when they are not the ones pulling lava from the earth.
Yeah.
It just might be able to shake them off their game, to give you or level the playing field a bit more. Not necessarily by dealing damage or harming the creature directly, but by just tripping them up mentally. Just push them off their game and force your own rhythm onto them rather than being forced into rhythm by the creature that you're fighting, which is in fights a really big thing, momentum in general. And in a lair, the villain usually has the momentum because of all the things that we discussed before, what the lair does for the villain. And if your characters change that dynamic up a bit, that can be a lot of fun. That can be a lot of fun. Trust me, try it out. It's amazing. Just when your players say, I'll pull that lever. I don't know exactly what it does, but this lever pulls you up to the rafters as well. And suddenly the villain doesn't know if you figured out the mechanism or not. And all of that. It's just, it just adds another layer of depth to the layer. That you can exploit as a table to get more fun out of it.
One thing, and I know the system is not controversial, but has been discussed in TTRPG spaces a lot for its flaws and things that are wrong with it, blah, 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 blah. But I've played for one of my birthdays a 7th C second edition adventure with my friend group. And this is a game about being audacious pirates on an adventure. And basically everything you're doing is supposed to be cool as fuck. I swing from the chandelier to the rafters up top, then jump out of the window backwards and grab a flag that is hanging outside to rope myself down to the ground and then escape. That's what what's supposed to happen. It's supposed to be the thing that has been mainstreamed by the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, basically, right? That type of combat, that type of escape, that type of action generally.
The
right?
classic swashbuckling action.
The classic
weirdness.
swashbuckling action. I took from that the system is great. I love it. I had a lot of fun with my players because I think at the end of the day, most of my friends play TTRPGs to do cool things.
Yeah.
And this game lets you say, I swing from the top of the mast with a rope so I can hit the giant kraken that has his tentacles around our ship. And I basically just swing like a pendulum around and then hit it with my greatsword. And I'm like, how do you hold the rope? I don't care. You hold it with your teeth. I don't give a fuck. That is completely something that when you put too much mechanics on it, just would get too watered down and too weird, too abstract into math. It just happens because it's cool as fuck. Or you make a simple roll that says, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. This just works. But I took from that when my players have cool ideas, work with them. Something that is very, very basic and has been said 1,000 times by us and everyone else, yes and anyway. Oftentimes, I think the yes and, when people give that advice, kind of is restricted to the roleplay side. Sometimes when your players want to interact with the mechanics of the game, and this is now something, right? For example, D&D does not allow you to. D&D doesn't allow the players to use lair actions the way the monsters do. And that's okay, right? On initiative count 20, this monster can do one of these 3 things with a lair. That's fucking cool. One of your players on their turn says, can I use this lair action, or can I use something along the lines of this lair action because this is how I imagine the lair, blah, 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 blah. Oftentimes, you could say just no, because it's not supposed to work for you this way. However, you can say, yeah, sure, let's figure this out somehow. I think those layers where the players are able to figure out the layer and actually engage with it are just ultimately more fun.
Hell yeah.
Because they allow the players, as you've said before in this episode, we've said countless times, and I think everyone knows, it's just more fun when your players are actually able to understand what's happening around them. Just telling them, yeah, there are 3 portals opening up and boom, explosions come out and then they close. Yeah, cool. That's cool for one-time thing. And then when your players go, okay, how does it work? And you say, I don't know. Like, sure, you can say that because sometimes you as a GM just do not know. When the players want to work with the stuff, give them an opportunity to. If they don't take it, or if they roll too bad on the roll that you assign to this, that's just how the game works. At least a possibility is there. That's where we want to be at. Give your players the possibility to engage with the layer of a villain in more meaningful ways than, I hope this ice pick from the ceiling doesn't hit my AAC. Because let's be real, where is the fun in, I hope the GM doesn't roll high enough?
And I think overall, Lairs can excel in that if you play a style of game where this is what your whole group wants, to interact with more of these things.
Yeah.
Can elevate your games to a completely new level. And I think one thing that you, when you run something along those lines, is that you should think about is that the lair itself should change something up in a way. Not necessarily in a purely mechanical way, but changing the environment itself by sticking to the theater example, opening up just the orchestra pit. The floor just moves out of the way to open up the orchestra pit. It then just changes the battlefield, or it changes something up that you now have to work with. Or in a Red Dragon's lair, the floor suddenly starts getting hotter and hotter every turn, and just changing something up to keep everyone on their toes, even though these things might not necessarily be actively introduced by your villain or by the players themselves, just because the world around them moves as well, is a lot of fun. And I think that's what Lairs should do, is change something up and continue to do so to be interesting.
Yeah, we did an episode on environment design for combats, I think, where we also briefly talked about lair actions and how they are supposed to be part of that environmental design. Go listen to that for sure when you want to figure out more on how to especially design the combat encounter inside a lair. But I think at the same time, a lair should be more than just for combat encounters.
Yeah.
And I mean, for D&D, it's a hard thing because, as we've said countless of times, the game is a combat simulator that lets you build your story that is then broken up by combat segments. Obviously, your lair should, and I'm gonna say it, first and foremost, be a combat thing. It should be combat compatible, especially when you design it for a game that is combat heavy, like D&D or Pathfinder. If your villain isn't combat focused, if your villain's lair hasn't something special for combat, I think it's gonna feel a little bit just like flavor. And I am not here to say that just flavor is bad, but you need a lot of flavor and a lot of stuff in your food, in your games, and stuff everywhere. However, you can do a lot more than just flavor, and that's what you want to do. But you also need that flavor. And for that flavor, you once again look to your villain. And I think you look at your villain, try to write down 3 core things: personality traits, aesthetics, and something that basically vibe. Write down those 3 things for your villain, and then look how you can incorporate each in your lair. The personality is how it's presented, or especially that villain's certain touch is what this lair is about, right? What makes this lair explicitly for this villain? The vibe is more just the general feeling that, and I think it's the lair shouldn't just reflect that villain's vibe. It should be an amplification of that vibe.
Hell yeah.
A lot of amplification, because that way you make your players feel like they are venturing into the den of a dragon or the lair of a lion, right? That way you make your players feel like this place is designed specifically against them and specifically for this villain. You need some kind of aesthetic to describe the lair. Whatever your aesthetic is, right? The lair should explicitly show that aesthetic. If your villain is a druid and their aesthetic is whatever you call it, nature core, right? I know it's simple. I know it's a simple example. Their lair shouldn't just be a brick and mortar building. It should be, I don't know, a forest. It could be a whole fucking forest, right? Your lair just doesn't have to be just one battlefield. It can be a whole area that is controlled. And I think the bigger the area, the stronger your villain, or rather, the stronger your villain, the more influence on a bigger scale they should have.
Yeah, I think something along those lines is pretty well displayed in games like Cyberpunk Red or Shadowrun, or at least in the aesthetic and vibe and feel of the layers. Because when you're fighting a big corpo exec, then you're fighting in, for example, Arasaka Tower. The Arasaka Tower is the layer. It has many layers to it. It's very complex and captures the vibe of that thing in combination of the aesthetic and the personality traits of your villain themselves.
The security systems are top-notch, completely designed to be dangerous. The tower is a maze if you don't know where to go.
Exactly, and it's just completely slick and clean and no funny knickknacks or weirdness. It's all just clean slates for you to get lost in and die in, basically. Or the same thing goes for cyberspace. When you're in there hacking this whole building, the net defenses themselves reflect the same thing. When you hack a thing from a street gang, it will not be as clean and as immaculate as the Tower of Arasaka. It might have the same security on a game mechanic level, but just through the vibe and the way it works, it just is completely different. And therefore, you have to check up on what the layer is supposed to do, what your villain is, and then reference each other to make it fit together. Symbiotic relationship, basically.
And I think now that you mentioned symbiotic, I'm gonna be the type of person that I always been. What if it's a parasitic relationship? You have a layer that is a certain place that is being perverted to the point of complete and utter unrecognizability by this villain.
Hell yeah.
And that is then, once again, because we've been talking mostly on the meta level here, the villain should then also be this parasitic thing, something that doesn't... Right? I don't know, your aberrations, which is, my opinion, a very underrated monster category in D&D. Nightmares beyond comprehension. Things from outer space that no one understands. They don't belong in this place, and it should feel like it. An aberration's lair should feel like it's a place that was once something else that has been corrupted to the point of unrecognizability by this aberration. It has been perverted into something different. It is disgusting. It is completely unsettling, and it's complete horrifying.
Yeah,
what you hear.
And this is the thing that you mentioned in amplifying the vibe of the villain that you're using the layer for, because that's really important. Not just how the layer itself feels, but how this feel interacts with everything around it. And when your players enter this aberrations layer, there should be a chill on their spine, on the player's spine. or on the character spine rather.
Yeah.
This is just the amazing thing that you can do with layers, because you can add layers to your to your villains, to the characters that you as the GM play, to create and enhance and amplify exactly these feelings that you're trying to evoke. And especially with these weird type of creatures like aberrations, outer world shit, you can just do weird shit, just completely out of the box. Something that hasn't been said before, haven't been explained before, and use contradicting terms to then still make sense in that regard. But it's something unknown to everyone. So it's weird and creepy. Or the exactly other way around, it's completely sterile and calculated, cool, calm, but there's still something. You can still feel the energy of that place.
I mean, you really want to nail down the tone you want to convey with the villain and their lair to create an actual great lair. Because lairs don't just have to be big caves. Why did this dragon choose this big caves? Always ask yourself the question, why? Why specifically this? Does it hold sentimental values? Does it hold strategic values? Ask yourself this why. Because you have this great villain and their lair just doesn't reflect that. It's gonna subtract from the experience. If Strahd von Zarovich doesn't have Castle Ravenloft be the gothic fortress of madness of a vampire lord that it is supposed to be, it's never gonna be fun to fight Strahd in Castle Ravenloft.
Exactly.
Because it's always just gonna be, yeah, this is a castle. No, it is not just a castle. This vampire who has lived eons lives here. This castle is his playground. This castle is his prison. Showcase that when he invites the players in. Make it seem at first as if it's this romanticized castle where a normal lord and his hopeful wife live. Then let's form cracks in that armor. Then showcase them the darkness of the corridors here, the horrors in the basements, the screams echoing through the halls at midnight, distant church organ sounds playing.
And that's something that I completely love for a special type of villain, or most types of villains that I use, is to show the lair as a perfect thing. Or imagine a perfect piece of plate armor as the lair, just as a simile. And then the first time you see this lair, this armor, it's immaculate. There is not a spot on it. You can reflect yourself in it. It's perfect. And then through the time that they are spent in this lair, you basically just push the fast forward button a couple of 100 years and see cracks forming, dust settling, rust building, and all of that then shines through. Then you have the comparison to what it is now, or how it feels now, to the moment just 30 or 30 seconds or a half an hour before, where it was just perfect, clean, and immaculate. And then therefore show the influence that the villain had on this space. Not necessarily just in a corrupting, parasitic, or symbiotic way, but just how it turned out to be, or how the villain is. Or in Strahd's case, first it's a romanticized gothic castle, but then the weirdness and creepy shit just starts seeping through.
The melancholy of this Lord, Strahd von Zarovich, comes through, right? Because he is not a happy Lord. He is not happy with the situation. He's melancholic. He's depressed. And that is going to reflect in his lair. When he has new adventurers come in that try to do something about it, he's going to greet them in a normal way, not letting them in. But when they then are inside, they're going to see that it's all way deeper than they thought. I have a question for you, one last final question, and that is what has been your favorite lair ever? It doesn't have to be the one that you've created. It can be something someone else created, or even something that you've just imagined from after playing a video game and you want that type of lair in your game.
Actually, the one thing that I still want to run at some point is this classic theater thing, but with a big fucking theater, a big old chunker. Just basically with a djinn type of villain. A complete maniac that wasn't one before.
Yeah.
The artistic maniac. Amazing thing. And then villain, let's call him just Jin for sakes of...
League of Legends, by the way, for those that don't know.
Just playing with the music, the atmosphere around it, using everything that theater has to offer to invoke weird feelings of dread and hope at the same time, and using smoke and mirrors to seem somewhere where they aren't, and therefore tricking them, moving the characters around the or through the whole theater, basically as in a haunted house ride, just showing the whole history of this play and just enveloped in this grand theatrical play broken down into acts. That is something that I want to run so badly, but I haven't found a way to really create that and reflect that or in a way that I am able to do yet. I still have to work on that, but I want to run that so fucking badly.
I understand you.
But let me throw that back to you. Tell me about your favorite
I have
lair.
Written down a bunch of random notes in one of my note-taking apps about a mushroom myconid sovereign type of lair.
Okay.
Where there is this hive mind of not just creatures, but also the walls around you are part of that hive mind, right?
Yeah.
Every single step you take is perfectly recorded by the entire network. If you stand too long, those mushroom spores are gonna be affecting you. Those mushrooms are gonna start burrowing through your skin when you're too long in this place. And if you find yourself lost, well, good luck not becoming part of the colony itself. The lair isn't just it doesn't just have a villain. The lair itself is your villain. And since you've entered, you've already lost. In quotation marks. It's gonna start showing you hallucinatory situations and scenarios, enemies that you think are there that aren't. And the question is just, when are you able to escape, if even? So yeah, that's the kind of fucked up shit I want to do.
It's just amazing. Fucked up shit is I love it. I love fucked up shit in TTRPGs. It's amazing.
I mean, it's a place where we can explore these fucked up shits safely, and that's a cool thing.
And that's the beauty of it. Yeah. Amazing. So I don't have anything else.
If you people out there have a favorite lair, add us on Twitter. Send us your favorite layers that you want to run or have run, or maybe just use the Spotify in-app feature to give us feedback on this episode and put your favorite layer in that.
Perfect. And with that, thank you all for listening, and hear you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DoubleDM. It appears you liked this one. What we had to say and our advice helped you. Why not show us how we helped you in a rating, or even write a review detailing us how we helped? You can do this on the platform that you are listening on right now. It's just a few clicks, doesn't take long, and helps us out. It gets us out there and our advice into more ears of more people. Thanks again for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. Have a great day, and hear you on the next one. Bye-bye.